Hey guys, this is Pastor Scott here at the Gatewood Brethren Church and coming to you on our brand new YouTube channel. I wanted to share a thought for just a moment about Psalm 23. You know, I've preached a lot on Psalm 23, and a lot of the time we automatically associate Psalm 23 with a psalm for the dead. But it's very much one for the living. And in fact, Psalm 23 I believe it's got a very interesting message to it that we often miss. It seems a few years ago when me and some of the men here went to a men's conference, as we often have in the past, there was a speaker at this particular conference that spoke on Psalm 23. And I'd never really thought about it this way, and I'll share it with you today. Psalm 23 begins and it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Well, I'll come back to something in a second, but let's read on. "He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over." And he ends by saying, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." But notice back in verse 2, he says, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." You know, oftentimes we associate green pastures with just some good rest and relaxation or what have you. But as a Christian, green pastures are more about nourishment and spiritual healing. I'm speaking figurative. Green pastures to a sheep was for nourishment and for optimum health. As a Christian, it's not about self-gratification, but as a Christian, it's all about drawing nearer to God. And then he says, "He maketh me to lie down." That sounds to me as if God was persistent about making one, putting one in a circumstance where they must lie down. Now, with that being said, getting back to the gentleman that was in our conference, he had been sick for some amount of time. I forget the nature of his illness, but it was for several months. And God had showed him that his green pasture was affliction. And the reason it came in the form of affliction is because it made him draw closer to God. So therefore, when God made him to lie down, it was something that this gentleman couldn't change in his life. And therefore, God used it to magnify his need for God in his life. It's very much like Paul. Remember when Paul the apostle had the thorn in his flesh and he said that he had sought God 3 times, but God wouldn't remove it? But the message that God gave Paul was that God's grace was sufficient for Paul. And that thorn in turn would make Paul to rely on God more. Kind of like making us to lay down in green pastures. You know, I preached on Gideon's army this morning out of Judges chapter 7. They started with 30,000+ men, I believe it was, and God whittled it down to 300 men. He said, lest, I quote, "lest Israel," if I may paraphrase, "lest Israel think that victory came by their hands instead of God's." See, God needed the Israelites to see that the victory came by God against the Midianites. And Paul needed to see that God's grace was sufficient to take him over and beyond any thorn in the flesh or hindrance that would come against him or his body. This made Paul rely on God. It made Gideon, in the message that I had preached there this morning, it made Gideon rely on God. And perhaps your affliction today is a green pasture that is going to nourish you to a closer walk with God. Because isn't that what God allows every tribulation and temptation or problem or trial that comes our way? Isn't it to draw us closer to God, to rely on God more? Well, the next time you read Psalm 23, He maketh me to lie down. And sometimes, as you notice in your life, when things get out of control and it nearly seems as if we have no option, maybe that's God making you lie down in a green pasture. And maybe that green pasture is for your own spiritual growth, nourishment, and spiritual optimum health. Green pastures are not always just a pretty scene for physical gratification and rest and relaxation. But I believe Psalm 23, I believe it goes deeper. I believe it goes deeper than that. I believe Psalm 23 could often mean that our green pasture is that affliction we often go through. Just a thought. You guys be encouraged in the Lord. Please tune in to our YouTube here at the Gatewood Brethren Church. It's entitled, Be Encouraged in the Lord. And do have a great afternoon. God bless you.